There, now I'm recording. Yes, okay, so now I'm recording. You missed the blurb on where's that going? I'm not going to say it again. Sorry. I told you not to rely on the recordings as your first, honestly, sir, I'm going to tell you right now. Don't rely on the recordings as your first venue of notes. If you take notes, you'll do better. The other direction that we see in post-impressionism, which has a very large, casts a very large shadow across modern art, is the direction established by Paul Cézanne, which is an interest in the structure of painting as a composition. And you can think everything that way, but he's really adamant and very sort of front-loads the idea that painting is not a representation of something. That painting is an object that the painter's job is to construct. So when we ask him, what is this? He goes, okay, it's houses in Provence seen from a valley near L'Estaque, which is a town in the south of France. No, that's what it is. But what it is a canvas of color. That it's the painter's job not to represent exactly what he sees, but it's the painter's job to put those colors on a canvas to construct, to structure a composition in a way that is strong, sound, and that trumps truth to nature. Truth to nature is second to the painter's job of making a well thought out composition. Right? Everything else comes second to that. So Cézanne was in a very different direction. Now, he was one of the original Impressionists. He was part of the group that Monet, Monet wasn't leading the group, but we talked about it. Monet put together this group in 1873. They had their very first show. In 1874, they become known as the Impressionists. Cézanne's one of them, right? He's there at the beginning, and he's already painting in the 1860s. He predates Impressionism as well. And he almost immediately begins to feel that the Impressionists are missing something. He has this really famous quote about Monet. He says that Monet is really nothing but an eye. In other words, all he does is see. He filters that a bit. He buffers that everything. Yeah, but he's also like, what an eye, he says, right? Monet is nothing but an eye, but what an eye he has, right? And what he said was that he wanted paintings, unlike Monet, he wanted them to have more structure. He said, Impressionism is great. I love the color. I love working outdoors, but the painting itself, the painting, not the subject matter, the painting has no structure. And that's what he felt he needed to do. He said he wanted to turn Impressionism into something. This now is a direct quote from him, right? I wanted to make Impressionism into something solid and enduring, like the kind of art you see in museums. So he wanted to make it last. Now, you might argue 100 years, 150 years later that, okay, Impressionism is the stuff in museums, right? But for him, the idea of just being an impression made it slight. Right? The idea of just focusing on changing light patterns and making that the picture, that made the painting come up short when it came to its longevity, its reputation. And he wants to make it something stronger, something more structured, something more, as he said, solid and enduring. Not endearing, enduring, right? And one of his more famous quotes, I don't think I have it here. Yes, I do. He says the way he's going to go about that is he says that nature must be seen. I'll say this slowly, right? Nature must be seen in terms of the cone and the cylinder and the cube. So he's going to reduce everything, right, to these very geometric, abstract qualities and use those things, those three-dimensional solids, right? I mean, those are solids, right? Those are cubes and cones and cylinders. Not two dimensions, those are solids. We'll talk about physics. He's going to use those to structure the composition. That's going to give it the enduring heft that he's looking for. That he thought that, Cézanne or Monet and the others just simply didn't really have. Particularly Monet, right? Because he is first and foremost a landscape painter. Cézanne is. And he does quite a few still lifes as well, some figure paintings. You'll see all of these. This is an amazing collection. National Gallery can go sit in a room with 12 Cezannes. How many other museums can say that? And they're not all of them either. And we've got more than that. But the rotating room of 12 Cezannes in a single room. We're really lucky this way. So, on the right, after a few early shows in the 70s, when he's a relatively younger artist, like you can see in 78, he's old like I am, but still not gray yet. But he gets really bad reviews. I mean, the Christians are getting kind of bad reviews anyway, some of them are. But oftentimes critics would single his stuff out for being like really bad. And he just decided he got sick of it and moved back to the south of France, which is around the same time that Van Gogh's down there, right? He moves down there in late 70s or so to the south of France. This is where he grew up. Cezanne grew up in Provence, right? So Provence is that region just north of the Mediterranean. Nice is down there, right? Marseille is down there. He grew up just outside of Marseille. And Van Gogh is in Arles, which is kind of a little bit closer to Nice, right? And they don't have much contact with each other. I don't think they got along all that well, or even do each other for that matter. But like Van Gogh, he's fleeing Paris, for his own reasons. Getting out of the center of town and working in these provincial areas, and we'll see that that's kind of a theme for a lot of artists looking to move in a new direction. Right? And so he kind of did the structural stages of work, and you can see that the rocks and the trees, the shrubs, and the grass have a sense of solid structure to them. And you'll notice as we look at, I might have a couple details coming up, is that everything's painted with these sort of 60-degree hatched strokes in this particular picture, which I really quite like. And it means that you end up looking at the rocks and the grass and the shrubbery kind of as being the same. And they all have the same kind of build-up, when we think about what the artist is doing, not as representing, but as structuring a composition, that everything has a similar structure in a way. And that's kind of a leitmotif, that's kind of an ongoing theme in Cezanne's work, is this idea that it's about the structure of the element and not about what it is. And in fact, as we look at the house itself, that's the one thing that's kind of painted differently. But it still becomes hard to say where corners and edges always are. So you can read that there's this odd structure of houses that seems to be kind of cobbled together in the middle there, right? And it's got the central body that looks like an L shape with a shadow, a very strong shadow falling across, right? So I'm talking about, let's do this. Right? And this area right here, you can see there's a strong shadow falling that way across it, right? And then there's this sort of secondary building here that's coming off of it, right? But if you look at that and you look at this bit right there, it's kind of hard to tell what the heck's going on there. I mean, where does the shape of all this going back end and actually make that corner? Because for Cezanne, it's not as important as understanding how those sets of cone, cylinders, triangles, right, how they fit together with everything else. That's what he's focusing on, is that structure. He's using observed nature, right? He's using his time outside to actually get us there, but he's not. It doesn't matter that it ends up looking like it would if you were to go and find kind of a stock, which you can do, right? And try to find this place. Would you recognize it? That's not what he's worried about. No, that's not what he cares about. Right? So structure of the composition. And that idea that the painting is an object, right? So we're seeing with Cezanne and Van Gogh two things. One, painting is personal, right? It's expressive. That's Van Gogh. And with Cezanne, we're seeing that painting is an object. Not a subject, but an object. This is so important for, how do we get to an abstract painting if we don't have this idea? Right? What is a Pollock, a Jackson Pollock, or a Mark Rothko, or a Pete Mondrian? It's an object, right? It's not a representation of anything. And this is such an important step in that direction, even though it still fits within kind of, representations. That fits the focus away from what it looks like and toward that structure in the composition. And both of them Cezanne and Van Gogh are really emphasizing this dialogue between this individual and the canvas, right? That the painting is a process, that you as an individual bring something really important to. Now, artists have always felt that. But with Cezanne and Van Gogh, what we're seeing is that becomes forefronted, right? That becomes spotlit in a way, subconsciously, that we haven't really seen artists, well, we have, but not as often, right? And they're very important. And we'll see the early modernists of the 20th century, they loved these guys, right? Cezanne died in 1906. And somebody asked Picasso, what did you think of Cezanne? And he said he's the father of us all, right? Just the debt was that strong, and he knew it. And when we get to Picasso next week, week after next, we'll talk about it. And he's the father of us all, right? It all starts here. We as historians say, no, it doesn't. It all starts with Manet or Courbet's Stonebreakers, but, still, and Vasari said, of course, it all started with Giotto, but, so anyway. There we are. What's next? Just a nice close-up of the paint and how it's really built it up. And you can see that those lines, the strength of that act of painting in him is so adamant, that he's not, it seems as if he's trying to make the paint into a rock almost. Like the patina that granite has, how it lightens, grow on it, how it oxidizes. And certain areas will have yellow on it, and certain areas will have blue. He's very much interested in trying to create that idea, but you'll also notice that even in this detail, the colors that are in the rocks are not all rock colors, right? There's our grass, there's our sky, the purple and the blue of the sky. There's the yellow of the house, right? Because again, part of his idea is to make a composition that works, and for him, bringing these other colors in, and at a certain point, there's blurring distinction. What happens right here? In reality, what is he seeing that inspires that? Is he seeing anything that inspires that? Or is that simply part of meshing together this composition? Right? And we don't have an answer. There's no way to answer that question. And it's something he does often, is to blur the lines. Right? To really push it, to really blur the lines. Another nice view, just because these things are really nice to stick your nose into. And again, what is he trying to describe down here? And I think at a certain point it's a stupid question, because I don't think we're ever going to really know whether that's rock or plant or dirt or what. And I don't think Cezanne wants us to know. That's why it's a stupid question, right? It's because if he wanted us to know, he'd just show us. What he sees this as is a part of a composition of colors that, begin to move eye back into space, move right into the composition, and bounce colors that appear elsewhere into this stitched composition that he's bringing out, right? And again, the houses. Now that we have it in close-up, you can see that we have the line here, which is so sharp at this point, right? All of a sudden, it's sort of, he goes back over the top of it there, and he's gotten rid of it. He's purposely gotten rid of it. And then here, the overhang of this house, it just kind of doesn't really work all that well, under here. And just from a distance, when we get up close, you realize that he's tied that in and he's coming up and then. Now, what is that? Is that a wall of the garden and this thing here, tree stump, maybe that is also part of the composition? That's the bottom line. Is that it's part of the composition. I wasn't supposed to take a picture of this thing. Some signs says don't, but I love it. It belongs to the White House. I don't know why Barack doesn't want this one on the wall. I would. But it's been in the National Guard for a long time. Going back to the Bush administration, I used to blame Bush, and I realized that maybe this is a permanent one or something. Yeah, George W. doesn't like good art, but it's not the case. In any event, I don't have good details in this one, but look at that house on the hill in the background. And you can see the one that's just below the ridge of mountains there. And look at how the edge of the house on the left-hand side, just here, right in that area. It's gone, isn't it? It's totally obliterated at a certain point. It takes a little bit, and then the color of the mountain becomes the house. And then without that little line, right there's nothing there that tells you that that mountain is that house. Because for Cezanne, he is more concerned with the structure of the colors on the canvas. Even the roof of this guy here has that sense that he just felt that needed something underneath that window. And I hate talking like I know what Cezanne's thinking, but you know, you get the sense that it's not about what's going on over here. See, look at that section of it. I got the details here. Not quite. But still, that gives you some sense, right? So look at this area right in here. It's impossible to tell. Right here, the wall color comes up and becomes part of the roof line, right? Part of the that area. On and on. I mean, everywhere you look, he's doing this. And he's challenging you. These are not easy pictures, and in many ways, they're incredibly brave because I don't think anybody in the 1880s is doing anything kind of close to this when it comes to breaking the rules of painting, the standard rules of composition. And if we think about the legacy of this for modern art, this idea of rule breaking is in fact something that we're going to see becomes kind of a motif that we're going to see again and again. The idea is that, okay, somebody's doing something, doing it for a long time, that it's high time we do something different. Because for modern art, right, one of the things that people have pointed to going back to the 19th century here is that the Industrial Revolution, which dates to the 18th century, right, but the progress of change sped up so much after the Industrial Revolution of the late 18th century, after the Enlightenment, that through the course of the 19th century, historical progress became more palpable. And I think it's kind of a stupid thing to say, because I think everybody understood progress is palpable no matter what. But I mean, you're seeing, you know, things like being able to take a train from Brussels to Paris, right? 1835 or so, 1840, when that happened. Yeah. Changes to cities, the idea of the factory, the speed with which things could be made. And people became very aware that the world that they lived in was not the same as the world that their parents lived in, which we're kind of used to, right? I mean, the internet and stuff like that, right? I just heard, today's the 15th anniversary of Wikipedia. They interviewed them this morning on NPR. I can't even mind it's been around that long. It seems faster than that in a way. But in any event, you know, we're seeing the same thing on the technological level. The things like, man, whatever was cool this year is gone. Again, how long ago was the iPod? What was that, like 2000 or so, the first iPods were, right? Do they even have one anymore? I've got one, but I don't use it anymore, you know? And what about, I got my vinyl collection. I almost never pull out my CDs anymore. Because why? You know? My CD player gets less use than my turntable does. My turntable is because I like that sort of stuff. But not my, technological right. We are aware it's a modern world, yeah? And that sense that we live in a world that wasn't like the world our parents or our grandparents lived in led many artists to this idea that we should not be making an art like they did either. We need a modern art for the modern world. That our art should break the rules. That it demands an expression. Because the ways in which we've expressed ourselves in the past simply aren't capable of expressing the modern condition. That's, I think, in many ways the primary push behind everything we're going to look at. This idea that the modern world demands a modern statement about it. Not the same thing people did. 3 or 4 years ago, I had a senior who wanted to do a project based on Thomas Cole, and I asked her why. I said, Thomas Cole, American landscape painter, mid-19th century, did a series of, progress of civilization and stuff. And it's a cool theme. I wanted to have some modern knowledge. But she wanted to base it directly on it. And I said, why? You're interested in the progress of your civilization. He's doing ancient Rome. What's in that for you? You know? And that's kind of this idea for modernism. It has to be, there's a sense that these artists have that it had to be different. It had to be new. The rules are ripe for being broken. Right? And Cezanne is terrific at that. Just absolutely terrific at breaking the rules. there's our house on the hill. And you can see how little there is to distinguish it from the mountain. You can also see something that Cezanne does quite a bit, is he leaves a lot of bare canvas. And many times that area, for example, the house is down at the bottom of that detail, right? You look at the top of that roof line, that just very lightly sketched roof line behind it, this bit right here, right? That area. You can see that the area, the white that you see there and along the gutter line as well, that's canvas. He's able, and again, we go back to what Cezanne is interested in, is the object nature of a painting. Not the subject matter, the object matter, right? That essentially is aware that the whole thing that he's doing is presenting to you colors arranged on a surface. Then why not just present you the surface too? You know, why not make that part of it? He does, and as good as anybody ever in using the bare canvas as part of the composition. Yeah. Oil. Yeah. Standard oil. It does. And then he works his oils through a range of different, what's the word I want, you painters? We thin it down with turpentine or whatever, right? So sometimes it's really fat, right? And sometimes it's really thin. And so the one we had it before, right, was really quite fat. You know, you could see the paint sitting up on the canvas, right? And here, he's washed it down quite a bit. And these are both on the same time. So there's no sort of like progression that we move from one to the other. But even early in his career, before he was in the part of the Impressionists, he was in the 1860s painting with a palette knife. And he's going in, and there's this wonderful painting at the National Gallery of his father reading the newspaper. I should hear. I don't know. No! No! I'm not going to try to pull it up, because I'm not quite sure what's going to happen since I'm using a new, I don't want to ruin it. His father's reading the newspaper. His father did not want him to be a painter. He was really against the idea. And in this picture, which is a good, I think, 8 feet tall, the National Gallery, Dad's sitting in his paper armchair, he's reading the newspaper. Just the newspaper where Cezanne got his first good review. And he's got painting this way. And in the background over his shoulder is a new still life that Cezanne had painted elsewhere. And he painted the painting of the painting. In the painting, right? But he painted the entire thing with a palette knife, which is what he was doing in the mid-60s before he became part of the Impressionists. And just as thick as could be, but that's utter awareness, right, of that idea that paint isn't a house. And a house isn't a house, right? A house is part of a composition, and paint is paint, right? And thinning it out here or thinking it out somewhere else, he called that his ballsy style. I can't remember what it is in French, but it basically means balled out style of painting. This means with a palette knife, balled out painting, right? When I was used to golf, it was never any good, but my old PA who golfed with me said that if you missed a shot, you had to play the whole down. Nobody else really laughed and joked and drank, and that's but Cezanne says, you know, it's a cocky style of painting. Right? So he's very aware from the get-go of exactly how paint matters, right? And paint is a matter, you know what I mean? So this is just watered down, turpentine down oil paint. Now in our studios here, because of our bad ventilation and various allergies, we use water-based oils, but oil-based oils you need to thin with turpentine, right? And water-based oils, of course, you can do otherwise. Yeah. That is a similar thing. I love that detail of the house in the center, this guy right here, how those colors are picking up and melding together the landscape right behind it, plus that mountain at the top. He's just so good at this. And again, it's early stuff. Those ballsy paintings are a little difficult. They're not that great compared to what happens as he gets into the 80s. He just hits a stride. This thing is incredible. Like I said, he did figural paintings, and it's worth looking at these as well. I don't have any notes on this. I just wanted to show it to you because it's such an amazing painting. I think it might be his son. I'm not 100% sure. But he's obviously posed the model in the studio in order to make the painting with some drapes behind him and off to the side, and had him strike a pose, and then worked it out. And probably only sketched it once, and then maybe, didn't have him pose for the rest of how many of the basic rules of painting he has broken here already by 1890. This looks like something, it could be 100 years later and you would still call it fresh and new. He's so far ahead of the game. That wonderful kind of insouciant look on the boy's face, but also notice how the hat doesn't really work on the top of his head, you know? It's off to the side, his face is not entirely finished, there's bits of the bare canvas coming in on the side of his eyeball, off to your left, by his right ear. You can see bits of the canvas. Right above the pocket on the chest, that white bit, that sort of Z-shaped white bit, that's canvas. It's bare canvas. And he's working it with that paint. He's realizing, I think, that that little bit of white makes the red look better. You know? So you get that contrast between it and the background that just makes it, without making it hurt, you know, put a green against it like Van Gogh might have done, then you're going to get that visual thing back and forth, right, where it starts to vibrate at you. But it doesn't. It makes that red just sharp enough that it's up. Like there's some really nice details in this, right? And so there you can see the little touches of here and here. But the hat's like too long on your left side, and you can see that even the brush up is utterly unconcerned with making it work. Little bits of canvas down into here as well. Just a terrific knockout sort of demonstration of painting. And there's that thing that's hanging behind it is it's a tapestry. It's something you own because if you look just off the boy's right ear on your left, you can see a sort of floral pattern to it. In that one little tube that, you know, again, cones and cylinders, right, and pyramids, there's that cylinder of fabric, if you will, that's just, you know, right here. Yeah. And he plays it down elsewhere, so it would have been a mess if he had made it as strong on the right side of the figure. But it works to sink it back, and it's all that one same piece of fabric, and we'll see in other Cezanne pictures. So, again, just an incredible virtuoso piece. Look at that hand. I wish you could do that. Again, the knuckles, between the fingers, the bare canvas there, and then the colors that he's using to bring in to make that hand are all the colors he's using elsewhere. So that green and orange on the back of his hand, you can find that in the figure's left shoulder. That's the right shoulder, on your left. You can find those same colors in the tapestry hanging in the background. The chair on the left, you have to spend a while with before you realize that's a chair. Because it's not sitting on the floor accurately, you know? It's kind of cattywampus there. And it's because that's not what he's worried about. He wanted that angle. Right? He wanted that cylinder to come in at 75 or 80 degrees off of perpendicular. Yeah, I think it's worth maybe not even saying it, but just looking at this. Right? So much he's working with that edge, he's really concerned with the edge of the sleeve, and you can see he's first laid it down, and he's put back over the top of it, the background. You know, he's laid out some of these things and he works it back and forth as he tries to get up there. And again, that hand is just, you know, almost nothing. And again, we were thinking about a painting being an object rather than a subject matter. And then it's paint, it's canvas, and you see that, and you're aware of the way in which Cezanne has put these things together. He loves these patches here that construct the composition. And those areas that they're the same colors he was using in that Hamlet picture that we just saw. For the rocks, for the trees, right? They're natural colors. There's a certain Cezanne sort of palette, you know. Yeah. What's next? Oh, that hand a little bit closer. So good. I mean, we've heard said this before, I think, in other classes, maybe last month. Just give it up. You know, you're never going to be this good. But look at that great purple and gray that comes along with pinky. You know, and how that plays with these colors of the red and the green. And yet, from a distance, right, you back away from it, and it kind of takes on that flesh tone. You know, he's so good with the paint as paint on his canvases. And there's our best, right? And you can see how much on the best that white is allowed, the ground is allowed to come through to access that. And how really, even with the darkness, he's rarely ever using black. You know, it's just a really, really amazing deep blood red coming there. Oh, that's smaller than that. In the same gallery, even more adventurous, from around the exact same time, a picture of an actor. Harlequin was part of a stock troupe of actors. They were Italian comedians. Comedians in French means actors. A comedian isn't, you know, Jim Carrey or whatever. A comedian is any serious actor is considered a comedian. And theater is often called just la comédie, a theatrical piece, right? So he's part of these Italian comedians who can trace their traditions all the way back to the 17th century and beyond, maybe even the 16th century, around the time of Titian. And each of the figures in these Italian comedies wore the same costume no matter what the narrative might have been. It's like a Bugs Bunny cartoon, right? It doesn't matter where he goes, it's going to be Bugs Bunny's here, Bugs Bunny's there, right? Or, I know that you guys don't know this because I razzed you about it last semester, but the Marx Brothers in the 1930s and 40s, these four vaudeville brothers, Groucho, Harpo, Chico, and Zeppo, who dropped out of it. But they made a series of movies, and they've done vaudeville, and they were always in different places. They're always Groucho, Harpo, Chico, and Zeppo, and Groucho always looked the same. He had his great big mustache, and his clunky glasses, and drawn on, and he walked funny, and he was the exact same character, even though the character's name would be different. But he's wearing the same costume, exactly the same, right? And that's the truth with these. They enact different kinds of plays, but they always had the same costume. So Harlequin, which was based on crowd gestures from the Middle Ages, always wore this diamond pattern kind of costume. Right? And so the idea of theatricality, I think it's kind of a key one. This is slightly bigger too, by the way. This is a good 5 feet tall. Not quite life size. And the theme of theatricality, I think, is kind of an important one with what we've been talking about, because these pictures are performances, aren't they? If you think about the artist, isn't the artist a performer? You're going to do something and put it out there and hope people like it, right? It's your performance. And eventually we're going to get to performance art, which you've, I'm sure, heard of at some point or another. But on a certain level, the production of art is a performance that is going to be judged on its merit as a performance. And for Cezanne to choose a theatrical theme casts the spotlight on that, doesn't it? That art is like acting. And just like an actor is judged on whether or not they have a good day or a bad day, right? Good performance, bad performance. It's not about the script, right? For a performer, my all-time favorite joke is this. You know who John Wayne is? Cowboy actor, right? I wish I did a good John Wayne. This is a really hilarious joke. Where John Wayne decided he wants to, at the end of his career, he decided he wants to do the London Theatre. And he's going to do Shakespeare. He's going to do Macbeth. Shoots Hamlet, whatever. He's going to do Shakespeare. And then there's London. He gets out there and he goes up and he practices. He gets up there and he walks out on stage and he goes, "Wah ha ha, what is this? A knife I see before me." And the whole crowd just howls laughter, right? Just because he's so bad at acting Shakespeare. And then he stops. "Doggone it, just wait one gosh darn minute. My name is John Wayne. I have won the Oscar for True Grit. You know, I have made over 100 movies in America. And I don't know why you're laughing so hard. And besides, I didn't write this shit anyway." So, make sure that the point is that you're not judging the play, you're judging the actor, right? And especially when you're doing the same thing all the time, you know? So there's something there with the meaning of the subject matter here that remains important. I'm talking about Cezanne as an enemy's composition. But oftentimes the meaning behind these things is also equally important. When he's doing landscapes, he loves those mountains in Provence that have that solidity. He does images of rock quarries right? There's an idea that you're carving in, structuring things. And to do Harlequin as well, this performer, is, again, Cezanne the performer. Cezanne the artist is a performer. And one that has traditions that he's working in, you know? The tradition of landscape, the tradition of still life. How do you do something new within old traditions? Maybe choosing a 17th century performer allows him to investigate this. With this particular picture, he's even more brave, I think, when it comes to certain compositional things he does. Because this is a taller picture, I got a lot of glare in it. But look at how it's a kind of a creepy face in a way because there's no mouth. And that happens where he's simplified to become something that looks like a crescent moon or a sickle that you would use to cut down grain, right? It becomes nothing but just a random series of blotches of paint. These patches that he likes that eventually come together to form that head, right? But at the same time, the more you look at it, the more you realize you start seeing these wonderful things like that piece of blue right there. You know, right off the top, there's nothing that it explains or represents in what he's been looking at. Nothing there that's being represented. It's all about what's being put together in this two-dimensional frame. That's the key element for him. Let me just get back here. Okay, let's do this next. The background is as important to him as the foreground. As you saw this with Van Gogh as well, that as he's working up the canvas, there's no part that's left totally inert. You know? Because for him, again, it's about structuring it all together to make it work. And so it picks up these elements. Look at that beautiful piece of red just off the fingertips there. That is the red from the costume, right? That just needs to be there to pull it together. And how it seems like you maybe mix that together with some of the blue to get that kind of yellowish green that goes up to the right from there, right in this area just through here. That's a weird sort of highlighter, isn't it? Let's get rid of that. And then I think even more important, if you look at the bottom, we talk about putting things back together again on the canvas more. Look at the baseboard behind his legs, right? It obviously is inconsistent. And it's not painted the same way on the left hand of the canvas as it is on the right hand. And how can you possibly explain the way that the light comes in right through there? How do you explain that? You know, it's not necessarily or entirely the shadow that Harlequin is casting, because that shadow goes back that direction, right? It's something entirely different. And what he's done is he just broke the rules, right? And it becomes, you can even see the top edge of the baseboard, which seems to be very adamant across the left hand side. All of a sudden it just disappears right there. And then the bottom edge, where it meets the floor, kicks up or back or something. But for Cezanne, the accuracy of the interior was not the key element of this, right? It was not about that accuracy. It was about making the composition, for his eye, making the composition work. And little elements, which are these great, every time I see this, I'm seeing things I haven't seen before. Look at that bit of blue that runs along the side of his leg. That brings it away from the background there. Remember what I said to you guys all before, right? There's not a problem that you can encounter in front of a painting easel that you can't solve by going down to the National Gallery. Right? They've figured out all the answers. You just have to have the right questions and sort of begin to look, and you'll find it. It's there somewhere. And then what about that baton? There's no way that it really attaches to that gnarly knuckled hand. But over and above that, behind his back, it just sort of disappears before it goes behind his elbow. Brave choices, right? He's really breaking the traditional rules. And I could point to dozens of other ways he does this, but I think this is really the most obvious way that he's totally... And this is why critics didn't like him, right? They'd be sticking it in their eyes, like making fun of him for doing this. But this is also why people who understood that maybe we needed some new rules look back and said, Cezanne figured it out. figured it out well. Our last Cézannes are a couple of still lives, one from the Phillips, one from the National Gallery, where all the things we've been talking about. There's that same piece of fabric that we saw behind the boy in the red waistcoat on the left, right? You can make out the flower thing here. And in fact, that's the same table in both pictures, isn't it? Look at the cut along the bottom edge of the table, just right in here, right? It's the exact same table in each of them as well. And the same idea, just going to put things on a table, arrange in the way you like them, and paint it. Which is kind of an interesting thing about still lifes, and why artists love them, because you get to be an artist twice, right? You get to make an assemblage. And then you get to paint that assemblage, right? So you get to make these choices twice over. What am I going to put in there? It's not just, in our classes you don't get that choice, right? Because, whoever's painted Tom's knack is going to stick up there whatever you want to paint. But, when you're on your own, you get to choose. And Cézanne loves fruits in particular, but also other objects. And you can see, again, everything we talked about, the colors that dance between the different objects, even though they're the same colors that appear. The top of the table on the left has all the colors you see elsewhere. But look at the front edge of the table as well, especially with the Phillips work on the right. And you can see that the front edge of the lower table, again, breaks apart, doesn't it? As on the right-hand side, as this passes through, it doesn't really line up. Yeah? And up here, you can see, again, the lines that construct the table come along and then they just disappear. As they reach the edge, as they reach some sort of transitional point. And these are these choices that Cézanne is making when it comes to these compositions that totally radically diverge from the rules. The plate of that central, that's the pomegranate in the middle, right? Here, this guy right here. The plate that it's sitting on doesn't work, does it? It's too big on the left and too small on the right. Almost as if there's two half plates that it's sitting on rather than one full plate. And that's simply because it would have gotten in the way of those pairs, probably. And Cézanne makes a choice. And also, how is it sitting on that table? It's got something underneath it to tip it up, but it doesn't quite work. Indeed, the top of the table on that picture, the Phillips picture on the right, also seems kind of odd, doesn't it? Like it's tipped up too high or something. Almost as if you're looking straight down on top of the table. And then look back here, right? The table was back. The back here was resting on the table. So where's the back end of the table? It's not, is it? There isn't even an edge. There's an area where the color is shifted. It's not a line or anything to make that an edge, right? He's brought that color back in to separate them out. If he left it this color, they wouldn't separate, would they? You wouldn't get the distinction between the two. And those are the sorts of decisions we see Cézanne make all of that. So we've got these two different trends that we're seeing, right? Here it's the 1890s, is with Cézanne, on the one hand, we're seeing this interest in structure, right? The painting as an object. And the painter's job is to structure the medium, or the media, right? That's your sole job. You structure the medium. You compose. What does a composer do, right? They put notes together. Yeah? Put different instruments together in music. And in fact, a lot of modern artists are looking at music because it's abstract. It does often abstract, doesn't have a narrative, and they think they're like musicians this way. Well, painter's job is very much the same. You take these disparate elements and you put them together. You compose. And Cézanne is emphasizing the idea of a composition. Painting is not a pomegranate and a ginger pot on a table. The painting is pigment on a canvas. And I didn't show you this. This is a recent acquisition of the National Gallery. I love this picture. Paul Mellon was one of the early benefactors of the National Gallery. He died a long time ago, but his heirs inherited most of his work, and he donated a ton to the National Gallery earlier, the Mellon collection. But his granddaughter, Bunny, I kid you not, Bunny Mellon. How's that for a name? It's not her stage name, right? Bunny Mellon is liquidating the last of it and is giving it stuff. And it's just the new mound, and this is just a knockout, right? I love the gloves. There's a nail in the glove. With the orange stripe on the back. They look like really a criminal in there, like in a comic book or something. But also, I love that. Look at that blue around the lemon. Isn't that great? That line of blue. How he used the paint to make it look almost like the rind of a lemon anyway, right here. And then he outlined it with some of the blue that he's using as the shadow for the vicar, right? He goes back around the other side. It's a knockout picture. Small. Just beautiful. But again, what's he doing that's different from Cezanne? It's really the expressive qualities of him. And that idea of these gloves is this animated presence, right? That, what a glove does is it suggests its owner, a well-worn glove looks like the guy who holds the person who wore it, right? And so to have the hands not there gives us this thing we talked about with Van Gogh, where he sees metaphysical, spiritual presence in inanimate objects, right? So these are our two trends, right? Major trends. And there are others as well, but these are the two major trends at the end of the 19th century. Priority propositions, subjective expressionism, both of them abandon direct representation, right? Or still have it, but we're moving away from it, okay? I think it looks like rosemary, doesn't it? You guys, anybody cook? It looks like pine. Either pine, something from the pine, or there's a branch from the pine or baby rosemary down there. And it even says it's painted in Arles, that's how he lived in. Right? And I know that area of, I don't know it, I've been to that area of France, and there's a lot of wild rosemary that grows there. It smells terrific. So that's my guess as to what that is. Something from that family. Because again, it's in the range still like that. Yeah. Please. Which he? Yeah.
Like, did he start painting like other painters on his time, and then he decided that he wanted to break out, or did he?
Wow, that's a really good question. What does the earliest Cezanne look like? There are some of them are in your text, I think. The thing about Cezanne is that the subject matters that he chooses. Okay, now there's two ways you can answer the question. One is thematic, and the other one would be stylistic, right? Thematically, Cezanne doesn't break any new ground. Thematically, like the idea of the Harlequin, I can show you 18th century paintings of Harlequin, right? Or the Italian comedians. I can show you them. Those are around for a very long time. Think back to Titian. Remember Intro Titian, the flute player, and he's a professional city musician, right, out in the countryside. And there's that one. So it's an idea back to Renaissance for that. And that's what he wants anyway, right? I want to make expressionism eternal, like the things you see in museums, he says. So he chooses very traditional themes. Still lives, the human figure. He does nudes as well. I didn't show you them. We will see them. Maybe when we get to Picasso. But he does these series of bathers, which is, again, the Greek mythology, Diana as a bath water, but modern. Totally modern. That's traditional. And then stylistically, early on, he's very close to the Impressionists. He becomes, I think, like Van Gogh, I think he spends time with your buddy Pissarro, right? Pissarro's like this godfather to painters. I think he figured things out. Do you remember that from your research from Westminster? I think he helped Cezanne, he told Cezanne, you gotta get outside. Right. And I think with both of them, the same thing was get outside. See the color as it is outside. So, Jay, your question is a bit hard to answer in that. When Cezanne paints in the 1860s, when he starts in the 1860s, okay? At that point, Monet has already started his career. And there's a number of artists that are, in fact, doing some rather adventurous things. Monet's early pictures are somewhat adventurous, but it's also the later part of this new movement called realism, which I kind of talked about on Tuesday, where artists were trying to paint the contemporary world. And this is where historians really want to say that's where modernism began. And so he fits within that pretty well. And in fact, he does these images in the 60s and 70s that are variations of themes that the other avant-garde painters of his time are doing. For example, he does versions of the same sorts of compositions that Manet was doing. He does I know that some of you haven't had the intro part 2, but remember the Olympia? The nude woman, the prostitute by Manet, right? Cézanne does an Olympia. It's in your textbook. But it's really fascinating as well. But it's as early as like from almost the same time, from the late 60s or so. Monet does a luncheon on the grass like Manet's, right? And so does Cézanne. And so he's choosing these things that are in keeping with other avant-garde. He's following with the younger crowd, right? So he's not saying the same things as there's the older academic crowd, which is still around all the way to the 20th century. He just never talked about it because it's just so boring after a point. But they're interesting, but we focus on the avant-garde, so it's part of that. That's a long answer, right? And it's hard to sort of categorize it. Then he begins to break the rules, more so than even the other ones did. One of the things we see is this one you can talk about this. He loves the idea of structuring compositions around emptiness with the one on the right. Even though he structures the composition, a lot of times you'll find that he chooses these things where instead of putting, the standard painting with the subject matter will have the subject in the middle of the painting, with a little bit of buffer zone around the outside, and it'll sit there, right, in the middle of the painting. And whether it's a still life or it's a human figure or whatever. And one of the things Cézanne likes to do is likes to put voids. And look at how much interest he seems to have in that nameless wall that's between the tapestry up above and the fruit down below to the point where look how many places where the fingers of that wall become really the kind of most interesting thing about it, between the ginger pot and the pomegranate, for example. Right? Or as I mentioned before, between those pairs. Or when we go back to the Harlequin that we just had up, right? How much interest he has in the void and structuring the void as well, right? These are the ways he's out there, right? Well, beyond anybody else. So we have these two different components in modern art, right? Subjectivity and composition. And, it's not that Cézanne isn't subjective, I think he is, right? And it's not that Van Gogh isn't interested in composition, he is. They just present different highlights, right? The subjective side of all of this that we saw with Van Gogh leads us to a movement called symbolism. Now, we use the term symbolism rather generically, right? Anything can be symbolic of something else. A man with a pen, the pen is a symbol of learned activity, right? The life of the mind. Symbolism. But the symbolism movement was a particular movement in the mid-1880s. It began the same year as the very last Impressionist show, 1886. And in many ways, we can talk about symbolism, the movement, the ism, as being another leg of post-impressionism, quite closely related to, for example, Van Gogh. The difference with the symbolist movement is that it actually had a central agenda. There was a symbolist manifesto, right? This is what symbolist artists are trying to do. They wrote it down. Now, with Van Gogh, we put it back together by just looking at all the pictures. With Cézanne, he wrote about what he was trying, but he didn't see himself as being a movement. Right? The symbolist saw himself as being a movement. Right? A movement in modern art. And they published this manifesto in 1886. The author of the manifesto was this guy named Jean Moret, wrote the Symbolist Manifesto, and he published it. Get this, this is the weird thing. This is the first time we'll see it again. He published it on the front page of the French daily newspaper, the Figaro, published in Paris every day. Front page, he bought this paper, Symbolist Manifesto. So maybe he opened up the Washington Post on some page of an artistic manifesto, right? I think it'd be great, but really, can you imagine, right, putting a manifesto on the front page of the paper? But the point is that they see their job as artists as being one that has outreach, one where they're going to affect the world, the community, in the same way that music does. So Moria publishes this manifesto, and it's not only for painters, it's for artists of any type, musicians, poets especially. In fact, your textbook, if you get it, when you get it, has a nice section on symbolist poetry. You should look into that, right? It's a movement that is not isolated to the visual arts. This is key. We're going to see this again numerous times, that artists see their role as contributing to the world in conjunction with the other arts, in conjunction with music, with poetry, with literature, with architecture. Art can change the world. Right? It's part of the drive behind it. So what's going on with the symbols? I'm not going to read the parts of this. I have one quote to solve it. Basically, the symbolists believe that our true emotions, our sense of spirituality, and I mean that not religiously, right? Our sense of the metaphysical world can be revealed through dreams and through fantasy. And we can find them in the myths of mankind, especially when those myths are dealing with fantasy. Those give us revelation of our true identity, our true emotions. Right? This is, by the way, right around the same time as Sigmund Freud, and the idea that dreams can reveal what you're really thinking. You know? Insofar as being interested in the emotional and spiritual side of humans, the symbolists didn't make any judgments. There was no good. There was no bad. So when we look back at these myths of humankind, they reveal to us something about our spirituality, but it might not necessarily be a good myth. It might not be a salvation story. It could be a damnation story. It could be a story of temptation. Right? Adam and Eve, where the spirit world interacts with the human world directly. Right? And in fact, many times within symbolist art, what we find are images that actually focus directly on figures that might otherwise be seen as negative. You know who Pandora is, right? It's a streaming music service, right? Pandora's box. Pandora was given a box that held all of the sins of mankind, and she could open it up whenever she wanted to, and drive us all crazy, right? So there's Pandora, not a heroine, right? Not good for a box of evil. Yeah. For the symbolist, it didn't matter if good or bad. They're not judging. They're exploring. Okay? So, we'll talk about this more thoroughly as we go through these things, right? So like I said, there were even more poets than there were artists. They often embraced decadence and perversity in their works as a way of trying to examine and get closer to what makes us human. Because we're all fallen, right? In original sin, we've all fallen short. One of the symbolist poets, here's this very short quote: "The essential aim of our art is to objectify the subjective." Keep it inside. Turn it out. Let other people see it. Right? What's subjective is how you see things different from everybody else, right? But make that objective. You see, isn't that Van Gogh in a nutshell, right? There. You see how some people might be wondering what this really was, wasn't part of it. Right? Our essential aim of our art is to objectify the subjective instead of subjectifying the objective. That's what just kind of. So in other words, what they're saying is that maybe this is how Van Gogh doesn't fit. What Van Gogh did was to subjectify the objective. See what I'm saying there? What he's saying? That's not what we're trying to do. No, you don't. Okay. What Van Gogh did is he looked out there, he saw something, and he gave us his subjective view of it. And what this poet is saying is their essential aim is to objectify the subjective. So stop looking at the world around you and start meditating within and bring that out. So it's not about rendering in a personal way the things that you see. It's making concrete the things that you don't see. Right? Does that make it clear? Yeah. Again, the terms, right? But he's a poet, so he's spinning the terms on you, right? So the object, the touchstone of our art is to objectify the subjective. Right? Those things that you can't see inside of you, make them objective, make them visible. Instead of subjectifying the objective. Right? Don't take what you see and make it personal. Take personal and make it seen. That's what they're going to be doing. This movement began in France, as I mentioned, right? The front page of the Parisian daily paper by Ron Moriat in 1886, but it spreads through all of Europe. And there are artists everywhere. Belgium, I love this picture from Retest. It's knockout picture. So these are the numbers in the textbook, right? If you get the most modern version, but you still find them in earlier versions, okay? So number 41 is number 41 in the Leonard Jacobin test. And of course, you guys have all seen the screen before, right? Then neither of these, I think, are meant to be things that they see, but what they're using is visual form to give ideas to inner thoughts. Okay. So there's a little introduction to symbolism. Okay? How does it play out? We're going to look at 2 or 3 artists to play it through. And again, this will bleed over until Tuesday. I think this one's going to describe, and I'll start putting this up on one, and I think these are worth discussing. And I'll try and keep it short. So when symbolism became an official movement in 1886 with that manifesto, there was a group of artists that got together and said that we are going to be an independent group of artists that follow the ideas in that manifesto. Because the manifesto was not written only for artists, it was written for art painters, it was written for all artists. So a group gets together and they call themselves the Society of Independent Artists. And they have that manifesto by Moriat at the core of their principles. They are going to take inner ideas and make them concrete. They're not going to be looking at the world around them and trying to paint that in particular. Okay? So, as I just mentioned, Pandora, right on the left. In Greek mythology, Pandora was the first woman. Right? And the name Pandora, you know what Pan means is epiphytes? Everything. Right? Pandemic is bigger than an epidemic. Right? Pan-American. Right? All of the Americans. Okay? Pandora means gifted in everything. And within Greek mythology, this meant everything. She was good at it all. Right? She's gifted. Pandora. And especially she's gifted in seduction. But no man can resist Pandora. But I would imagine knowing Greek mythology, probably no woman either, but, you know, say that. Right? And according to the myth, she was actually made from the earth, kind of like Adam was, molded from the earth by the order of the king of the gods, Zeus. And the whole reason Zeus made her was to torment the rest of mankind. She was going to be beautiful evil, he said, to torment all of mankind. And the reason Zeus is doing this is he's getting back at mankind because Prometheus had stolen the fire from the gods. That's, you don't need to know Greek mythology, but basically, Zeus is exacting his revenge because of Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods. And he said, I'm going to give Prometheus this woman that he can't resist. And her job is just to torment all mankind. So, she gets this container from the gods that has all of the sickness and the pain, death that we could suffer as humans. And it's up to her to dispense it at her will. With this in mind, it brings up a theme that we see quite a bit in Symbolist art, and that's the theme of the femme fatale, the deadly female. And in fact, a lot of modern art, modernist art, is rather misogynist, you know that word? Okay. Anti-woman, you know, depicting women from a particular point of view where they're dangerous. And a lot of that can be chalked up to a society where women's roles are changing, becoming more what you're accustomed to, where you have the freedom to go out on your own on the street, which wasn't the case everywhere in the 1870s, 1880s. And this idea that once the rules get broken in society, you demonize those who are breaking the rules, right? Think of what's happening in the political dialogue right now with immigration, right? A lot of the anti-immigrant vocabulary you're hearing out there is because people don't like the idea that it's not just white guys in this world. And it's easy to demonize them altogether. It's been going on for decades. That's just one element. Right? So the Pensadol idea is certainly here with Pandora on your left. You'll notice as a symbol of her, she's not judging or anything. He uses sort of dreamscape, doesn't he? Mountains and flowers, but none of them are rendered in a way that does anything to suggest it. Interestingly, Rendon worked with a botanist. He knew his flowers, right? He had actually studied under a botanist. And in both of these pictures, you get that sense that he's really interested in flowers, but not to the point where he's trying to give us flower symbols. Well, this is dandelion or whatever. He's not going there. But when he's using her, the flowers as part of this dream-like world that he's creating. Again, making objectives, making external the things that are internal. So she's not any real one place. Redon was elected the head of the Society of Independent Artists when they began in 1886. And for French art in particular, he remains the touchstone. On the right, the title of it is Mystery. That's not a museum title, that's the title he gave it. Which means, of course, that he's not trying to, he doesn't want us to know what it is. Woman as mysteries, the figure as mysteries. The idea of mystery as part of this quasi-supernatural metaphysical world. Certainly, though, doesn't he kind of look like a Madonna figure from Renaissance art or an old icon, an old Byzantine icon, where all of a sudden she looks like the caring mother of God with flowers in her arms? At the same time, could she be a suitor or someone whom you are the suitor of, that you've brought her flowers? These things are all tied up together, and there seem connections between these different things, with no single meaning invoked. Symbolism, but rather numerous meanings being alluded to. So it's odd to call them symbolists, because you think of symbolism as A equals B, right? The pen is a symbol of the learned life. Sometimes a pen is just a pen. For the symbolist, it's more about opening the can. It's more about being Pandora, opening the box, and seeing what happens, right? Suggesting symbolisms without nailing any particular symbolism down. I just found this morning when I was looking at the lecture. It's a lithograph with collage, what we call chine collé. So there's colored papers that have been glued down to the surface on top of a lithograph. Isn't that just beautiful? Stunning, right? And again, they're the stuff of dreams, aren't they? They're so mental images, you know, that have somehow made their way to the paper itself. And so we have this beautiful outline of a woman in yellow against what appears to be clouds or the edge of a hedge. A bit of flowers again in the upper right corner. It seemed to be a theme for him that nature, maybe flowers for him meant something more. Does anybody know who why would he title it Beatrice? Does anybody know who Beatrice is? It's a very famous Beatrice in literature. You know the story?
Greek?
No, it's Renaissance, actually. It's early Renaissance. The Renaissance poet Dante wrote the Inferno, the human comedy, right? Dante, and by the way, Dante, Beatrice was his beloved. And Dante would be a great theme anyway for Redon, right? Because what does Dante write about? He writes about this dream travel that he goes to hell, right? Goes to paradise, works his way through purgatory, 3 parts, right? And that idea of this spiritualized dream voyage is a perfect touchstone for us, right? But add on to that, the story of Beatrice, do you remember what it was about? He saw her as a kid. Yeah, he saw her as a kid. They were never even together. She is this lost vision of perfection that haunted him forever, right? And he sees her when he's young, right? I mean, 14 or something. He sees her in the town square, and he's just dumbstruck. She's so beautiful. Yep. And he never forgets her. So again, how's that perfect and sinless, right? This is for Dante, Beatrice is nothing but Mary. Right? She exists as a perfect internal image, not as something in the world itself anymore. And that's the idea that Redone is trying to figure out. I have one more Redone and then we'll quit. Creek said KRG, I'm sorry, it's kind of a crappy picture. KRG is the Krieger Museum up on Vauxhall Road. Very few people ever go there. It is terrific. Tiny, but terrific. And they have this in it, which is, as you can see, titled by Redone, The Bottom of the Sea. And again, for him, even though he seems to suggest that he's looking at the external world, the physical world around him, really the bottom line is he's painting shapes. Right? That evokes things without actually representing them. So you end up with octopus shapes or jellyfish shapes or coral shapes, fish shapes. But it's very difficult to really say that any of them is a detail of that, right? Or that his central agenda is to show us what it looks like. Instead, I think it's almost like he's conjuring, and also, by the way, wouldn't the bottom of the sea be a great metaphor for a dream? A physical metaphor for dreams would be scuba diving, right? And this is before scuba, right? Self-contained underwater breathing apparatus that didn't exist yet in 1880, but the idea of going under the water at least, and finding a world there that's so different from the world you see every day. And you see, it's almost a metaphor for dreams. And he's wonderful. I love Redone. He also did printmaking. We did Chelsea look at those, right? He was a catcher, a lithographer as well. And sees on these mythologies, and I think that, the ocean is a mythology as well in itself. And you think about all the myths that relate to the ocean, like Atlantis. Or like Venus, the goddess of love, was born from the ocean, right? And how many times the sea, in the Middle Ages, the Virgin Mary was seen as the star of the sea to many people. And Redone knows this stuff. And he sees within it some sort of underlying theme, that he can allude to with these pictures. Okay, that's 5:45. Don't forget there's an art opening tonight for those of you who are in that, right? What time does that start? It's 6 or 5. There's an art opening in the Berry Gallery. There's a photography show in the Berry Gallery. It either starts at 5 or at 6, and I think it might be at 6. They're usually at 6, aren't they? You guys had a show last semester. But yours was at 5, wasn't it? Okay. I will see you guys on Tuesday. Remember, you should be trying to get your hands on the textbook, the isms book, so you can get working on those right away. I think symbolism is one of the isms you can do if you're into it, right? So, okay, see you soon.